The Baltimore Ravens finished the 2023 season with a 13-4 record and made the playoffs for the fifth time in 6 years. Unfortunately, they lost in the AFC Championship game to the Chiefs with a score of 17-10, and unfortunately, Kansas City would go on to win the Super Bowl 2 weeks later. It was a very, very frustrating end of the 2023 season for the Ravens, in a year where it felt like they were going to win the Super Bowl. They had double-digit wins over several playoff teams, including the Texans twice, a 14-point win over the 49ers on Christmas night, and a 37-point beatdown of the Miami Dolphins in Week 17. But they couldn't finish the job in what was otherwise a fantastic year for the Ravens. And now the Ravens are in a very tough situation. Not just because of losing to a dynasty in the postseason, but because of how many coaches and former players were taken from the 2023 roster compared to where they are now. And from the AFC Championship game against the Chiefs until the present day, the Ravens had to replace 3 starters along the offensive line, 3 starters on defense, and plenty of more rotational players. And this is a big reason why I think the Ravens are in a tough situation entering 2024. And despite being in a tough situation entering this year, I do want one thing to be clear. They are still a very good football team, and they are probably going to be a heavy contender again. The only question is, how far can they go? Well, we're going to break it down in today's video. Now let's begin. And we are starting today's video by breaking down what the Ravens did in free agency, both in terms of who they lost and in terms of who they acquired. The biggest loss they had was linebacker Patrick Queen, who signed a 3-year deal with the Steelers for $41 million. Internally, the Ravens knew Patrick was going to leave in free agency after the 23 season because they did not want to pay an average of $34 million for their inside linebacking duo of Roquan Smith and Patrick Queen. $34 million, of course, comes from 20 on an average annual value basis for Roquan and 14, which is about what Patrick Queen signed for. Technically 13.67 if you want to be correct. But the point is, the writing was on the wall for Queen, and he had to have known his days were numbered when they made the trade for Roquan, and especially when the team gave him a $100 million contract. And credit the Ravens because they had a replacement plan in place for this, as they selected Clemson linebacker Trenton Simpson in the 3rd round of the 2023 draft to eventually be the Patrick Queen successor. But one big reason as to why I am a little hesitant with the 2024 Ravens, believe it or not, has nothing to do with Lamar Jackson, but it has to do with how many players had career years for Baltimore last year, with Patrick Queen being one of them. Queen had over 130 tackles, 9 tackles for a loss, and even had 3.5 sacks and played at a Pro Bowl level. Is it realistic to expect Trenton Simpson, after playing 46 total defensive snaps last year, to come in and play at the level Queen did last year? You can be the judge of that question, but I don't think it is. Not only that, but they also lost Jadeveon Clowney, who signed with the Panthers, and I know Jadeveon had unrealistic expectations coming out of South Carolina back in 2014, but he had the most pressures in any year of his career last year with 71, which also led the team. And entering the year with the top 2 edge rushers being Odafe Oweh and Kyle Van Noy scares me a little bit, and while Van Noy has been a really solid player throughout his NFL career, I have some concern with him being the number 1 pass rusher at 33 years old. Oweh also runs hot and cold, and I have said countless times on the channel that it usually takes trench players a few years to really come into their own, but this is a pretty big gamble for Baltimore. After those 2 guys, it's David Ojabo, who I liked coming out of Michigan a few years ago, but he's played in 5 career games and played just 83 snaps last year. Their number 4 edge rusher is 3rd round rookie Adisa Isaac, who I would not expect much out of in year 1, and we'll break him down more later. All of this to say that replacing Jadeveon Clowney is going to be a very difficult task, despite what you may think of him as a player. They also lost safety Geno Stone in free agency, who had 7 interceptions last year, and while I think Geno had a career year, replacing his production is going to be almost impossible. I know they recently signed veteran Eddie Jackson, but replacing the defensive production of what Queen, Clowney, and Stone brought to the table last year is going to be very, very difficult. Are the Ravens still going to be a good defense this year? Yes, and that's not a question. They're not going to go from the best defense in the NFL to bottom 5, barring several major injuries or flat-out awful coaching. But I really believe the 2023 Ravens defense would have been talked about like the 2015 Broncos defense was had they won a Super Bowl last year. And when you factor in nearly every player on this defense having a career year, whether it was Justin Madubuike, Roquan Smith, Kyle Hamilton, or whoever, along with the players we mentioned that left in free agency, and along with the position coaches that got promoted elsewhere to become defensive coordinators, this is why I think the Ravens are fighting an uphill battle entering 2024. Not only that, but there were also a lot of things that went the Ravens' way from a competitive standpoint last year. Having Joe Burrow go down benefited the Ravens from a football standpoint. We do not wish injury upon players, of course, but Joe Burrow going down last year benefited Baltimore the same way Lamar not playing in the 2022 wildcard playoff game benefited the Bengals. Also, yes, I know the Ravens beat the Bengals with a healthy Joe Burrow in week 2 of last year, and I was simply pointing that out. But what also benefited the Ravens last year that absolutely cannot be counted on again was the Chiefs struggling at times in the regular season. There was a point in time where the Chiefs went from 7-2 through 9 games to 9-6 through 15 games, and due in large part to that allowed the Ravens to get the number 1 seed in the AFC, and also the collapse of the Jags, which the Ravens played a part in dismantling themselves. Are the stars going to align for Baltimore this year in the sense like they did last year? I personally doubt it. But what I will say positively about the 2024 Ravens defense is they are still a very talented unit, and I absolutely love this team's secondary. Winning in the AFC in today's era is an incredibly difficult task, much less making the playoffs in 5 of the past 6 years like the Ravens have. Aside from having an elite quarterback, which the Ravens absolutely have in Lamar Jackson, how do you consistently compete in today's era? Having a good secondary to be able to counter the quarterback play. We will break down Nate Wiggins more during the rookie impact, but Baltimore picking him up was a very Baltimore pick, and I mean that in the best way possible because of how good of a prospect he was. Marlon Humphrey only played in 10 games last year and has played in 13 games or more just once in the past 3 years, so adding not just a 5th round depth player to the secondary, but a legit first round prospect was critical. And there will be questions in March of whether or not to pay corner Brandon Stevens, who is entering the final year of his deal. The 2023 Ravens finished 6th in passing yards allowed last year, 2nd in passing touchdowns allowed, and were 3rd in interceptions as a team as they pulled down 18. They will be a good secondary again in 2024, and I have no doubts about that. Outside of the corners Baltimore has, which are already impressive in itself, they have one of the best safety duos in the league, if not the best safety duo in the league, in Kyle Hamilton and Marcus Williams. Kyle Hamilton, like Nate Wiggins this year, and hell, Tyler Linderbaum for that matter too, were all very Ravens picks in the sense of letting the board come to them and then taking the best player available and making several teams look like fools years later, which is exactly what happened with Kyle Hamilton too. Kyle was a first-team All-Pro last year, and the way they used him, which was really as a versatile chess piece, should be expected again. I didn't mean to sound so down on Baltimore earlier as much as I was frustrated for them and their fans when the cards aligned for them the way they did last year, because quite frankly I don't think that's going to happen again, at least not to that magnitude. But the 2024 Ravens defense has playmakers everywhere, whether it's Roquan, Kyle, Justin Madubuike, who is an absolute beast, or even Marlon or soon-to-be Nate Wiggins. They are led by new defensive coordinator Zach Orr, and personally, I think they should finish in the top 5 to 7 in points allowed per game. Their schedule is quite difficult, so I wouldn't say top 2 or 3 in the league, but with how good this unit is, and with how much I expect the Ravens to run the ball offensively, which in turn will help keep the defense fresh throughout the year, the sky is the limit for the 2024 Ravens defense. The big thing is, the new guys are going to have to step up, and in a major way. Now, pertaining to the 2024 offense, not surprisingly, it's going to start with running the football. That's not a Lamar is a running back joke. It's more of a fact that the Ravens have finished top 5 rushing and offense in each of the past several years, due in large part to having a quarterback that runs a lot, and I wouldn't expect 2024 to be any different. Now, Ravens fans 4 or 5 years ago probably felt a different way about Derrick Henry than they do heading into the 2024 season, and rightfully so, might I add. Now, with most normal running backs, I would not be comfortable with a team heading into the year with a 30-year-old back and say, you know what, this guy has a legit chance to go for over 1,000 yards this year. But Derrick Henry, as we know, as Ravens fans know from previous experience, he's not a normal back, and most running backs are not 6'3", 245 pounds, and the size of Von Miller. So I am, believe it or not, comfortable with the projection of Derrick Henry being a productive back for the Ravens this year, and that's despite him having nearly 2,200 career touches. But one player I am also really looking forward to seeing how he bounces back this year is second-year back Keaton Mitchell. Keaton was a pretty electric player during his rookie year before he ultimately went down with a season-ending injury, and the 2024 Ravens run game is something I'm going to be paying heavy attention to. And believe it or not, I think the Ravens run game this year is going to play a tremendous part in how the defense plays as well, because it all goes back to the thing we talk about all the time, which is complementary football. If the Ravens offense is out there for a 10 or 11 play drive that takes 5.5 minutes off the clock, obviously that's going to give a lot of benefits to guys like Michael Pierce and Kyle Van Noy, vets along the defensive line that could really use the extra rest, especially when week 17 and week 18 and when the wild card and divisional round of the playoffs come through. So the Ravens running game, I fully expect to be in the top 5 again this year, but pertaining to Zay Flowers, Mark Andrews, Rashad Bateman, and Isaiah Likely, I think there's only going to be one 1,000-yard receiver this year, and I think it's going to be Zay Flowers. I know Mark Andrews went down really for most of the final parts of the season during the Bengals game last year, but I don't think Mark is going to be a 1,000-yard player, and that's due in large part to the run game and also the expected breakout of Zay Flowers. I thought Zay had a tremendous rookie season when you factor everything in, and the big thing with Zay Flowers for not just 2024, but for probably the next 5 or 6 years is he's never going to be a big stat sheet guy, and that's fine. That is part of the role of playing a receiver in the Ravens offense. You're never going to lead the league in any category statistically, but Zay is still going to be a phenomenal receiver, and I think he can still finish the year with around 80 receptions for 1,100 yards and around 6 or 7 touchdowns. The 2024 Ravens offense is going to be led by the ground game, and when they get to the playoffs this year, assuming they do, which if they stay healthy, I think would be a fair assumption, as I think this is a very elite roster through and through, Todd Monken, please run the ball more than 6 times, because that's what this offense is meant to do. Run the ball, help the defense out, play complementary football, not avoid the pass, of course, because you have a 2-time MVP winning quarterback at the quarterback position, but please run the ball with Lamar and Derrick Henry, and Keaton Mitchell for that matter too, and make opposing defenses' lives hell. This offense, the potential for this offense rather, is as high as they want it to be. I really liked the 2024 Ravens draft class, especially for where they were selecting, which started with the selection of corner Nate Wiggins. Yes, Nate was an undersized prospect, and there were a few reasons that he fell all the way to pick 30, but if Nate was just 10 pounds heavier, I really think there's a consideration that he would have been a top 20, maybe top 22 pick in the class. And whenever you can have a top 20 player in your draft class fall to pick 30, like we said with Kyle Hamilton a few years ago, and even Tyler Linderbaum, Nate Wiggins going to the Ravens was a very Ravens pick. They let a good player fall and they capitalized, and I think we will see that not just in 2024, but for the next 3 or 4 years too. Roger Rosengarten, the second-round pick, is a bit of a projection, and I thought it was a little rich for Roger. Now, not too much in the sense that I thought Roger was going to be a mid or late third-round pick. I thought he was going to be right around an early to mid third-round pick. Hopefully he works out. He's a very athletic tackle, and he's going to to have a tall task in year number 1, especially being an offensive tackle for not just an MVP winning quarterback, but for a former rushing champion as well. So the Ravens are going to need Roger to produce and right away at the right tackle position. Adisa Isaac was a third-round pass rushing prospect, and you should never really expect all that much from any third-round pass rushing rookie. The reality is he's probably only going to be a rotational player, and if Adisa has maybe 20 pressures this year, maybe 3 or 4 sacks, that would be a very productive year for him. I wasn't the biggest fan of Adisa. Now, I liked where they got him, but I wasn't, screaming that the Ravens absolutely stole the 2024 draft by drafting him in the 3rd round. Hopefully he produces and like we said, has 15 to 20 pressures this year, but don't expect too much from him. Now, one pick that I really liked, especially for where the Ravens drafted him, was Iowa State corner TJ Tampa. Former Iowa State running back Breece Hall also tweeted that the Ravens got an absolute steal in TJ Tampa. Granted, most of the time players have, former teammates that get selected on either day 2 or day 3. They will vouch for them, but I thought TJ Tampa was a much better player than where they selected him on day 3. I thought TJ was for sure going to be a top 60 or top 75 selection, and they got him around pick 130. Again, a very Ravens selection, and I mean that in the best way possible. And whenever you can draft a player like TJ Tampa on day 3, a player that really nobody thought was going to be available that late in the draft, and at a position where you can never, and I mean never, have enough depth in today's era, I'm all for that every single time. The last player we will discuss from the 2024 Ravens draft class is Marshall running back Rasheen Ali. Obviously, we should not expect too much from him in his rookie year, but I thought the Ravens had a pretty solid depth pick here. Maybe if Keaton gets hurt, maybe if Henry misses a game or two, Rasheen can step up and fill that void. Maybe he has an 8 or 10 carry game, maybe even 2 8 to 10 carry games throughout the year. But I thought for where they selected him, which was around pick 160, I thought he was a top 130 or 140 player in this class. So anytime you have that plus 25 or that plus 30 draft value on the chart, it's a great pick no matter how you slice it. So I thought the Ravens, for where they selected or where they started the draft at pick 30, I thought they did a very good job. And there's a reason that Eric DeCosta and the Ravens have been contenders year in and year out. Not just for a year or two now, but for, well, half a decade. So the 2024 Ravens rookie impact should be pretty substantial, and I think especially with Roger Rosengarten, a starting right tackle, that we will see it from day 1, and eventually Nate Wiggins will take over. It's just a matter of when, whether that's midway through the 24 season, maybe even in 2025. That will eventually prove to be a good pick. I really, really liked the 2024 Ravens draft class. The 2024 Ravens schedule is brutal, and there is no way around it. They start in Kansas City for what will be a rematch of the AFC Championship game, then come home to play the Raiders in Week 2, then go to Dallas in Week 3, then come home to play Buffalo in Week 4, and in Week 5, a trip to Cincinnati. For Baltimore to really make a deep postseason run this year, I think it's almost going to have to be a prerequisite for them to start out with a 3-2 record, because it does not get easier from there. They play home against the Commanders, then go to Tampa on Monday night, then go to Cleveland, then come home to play Denver, and then play Cincinnati on Thursday night. That schedule is pretty brutal for any team, let alone a team that has Super Bowl aspirations. And the one big thing for the 2024 Ravens that I really wanted to hammer home was how fortunate everything fell for them in 2023, both from a competitive standpoint, from them getting the number 1 seed, and even from them, yes, they played CJ Stroud in the divisional round of the playoffs, but even for them getting to play a rookie quarterback in their first home game. And I don't think the cards are going to fall for them again. Getting a number 1 seed, whether you are even Kansas City for that matter, is incredibly difficult for any team to consistently do, let alone in back-to-back years. So with all of this being said, my team ceiling for the Ravens this year, I mean, you can convince yourself, and if you want to say Super Bowl champions, you can. I am really, really trying to limit that to maybe 2 teams in each conference. Maybe I don't want to get into the habit of, well, if this goes their way, if that goes their way. All of that being said, my team ceiling for the Ravens is the AFC Championship game this year. I hope you enjoyed today's video, and if you did, please like and subscribe, as only about 41% of people watching are subscribed, and helps the channel tremendously. Until next time, please be safe and have a great day. Love you guys.